touch this. Can't touch this. Can't touch this. Can't touch this. Break it down.
Hello and welcome to Hammerheads, the podcast where we talk about every great Hammer horror film between 1957 and 1974, according to the BFI's list. And this week we're on episode 16, and let me introduce my partner in crime, Miles Watts, and he can introduce our special guest this week.
That was the voice of Marcus Wilson there, and I'm Miles Watts, and we have a special guest this, I would say week, but this is it's been like 3 months since we did the last episode. We'll try not to leave it as long between episodes. We've got Mr. Andy Stanton with us here today. And Andy is a chap that I've known for a good 20 plus years. We used to work together in a bookshop and had a shared interest in movies. And in the years since, I've sort of realized Andy's a big horror aficionado and also writes for quite a few horror publications. So welcome, Andy Stanton.
Well, thank you very much, Miles Watts and Marcus Wilson. Hello.
Hello. By the way, this is the Andy Stanton who's from Yorkshire and not, in fact, the Pixar Andy Stanton. In fact, ours is better. You know, ours has just done much better works in his life, I think, including starring as a zombie in my zombie film and letting us use York Library as one of the locations, which was one of my favourite locations to use because it felt like we were doing a Buffy episode.
It was great. It was so much fun. It was
fun.
Bit of a dream come true for me getting to play a zombie briefly, albeit briefly, in the basement. That was really good fun. Tick box.
Well, I sort of realised over the years that Andy was such a horror fan because we started talking about horror films while we were filming one, obviously, and gradually Andy's been doing bits of writing for various publications. Can you name some of the publications you've been writing for?
I'd love to say publications, but it's just the one. But thank you for that.
Publication.
It's called We Belong Dead magazine, right. Which was started by a chap called Eric McNaughton quite a few years ago now, and he published so many issues and then stopped, and then he resurrected it. Yeah. And it was purely by chance. I mean, I've been a horror fan since I was a kid. Yes. Never thought I'd be writing about them or anything like that. So joined their Facebook group, and he put on there that there were short of writers for a book they were doing. So I just thought, well, sod it. I'll put myself forward and see what happens. And that was about 3 years ago now. Yeah. So I've been writing steadily for them now. They do magazine's just gone to quarterly.
Nice.
But they normally put out 2 or 3 books a year as well. So yeah, I write for the magazine and the books as well. So
that's really great.
It's a lot of fun.
And because we always ask the guests when we have them on here, which is fairly irregularly, how exactly they got into horror films. So Marcus and I, we were talking, it was his nana who used to let him sit up and watch Nana Wiggy. And with me, it was, I would discover stuff on TV or that my dad had taped off the telly and said, you might like this. And then there would either be something else on the video, although actually my dad didn't really like horror films, but I did. And then going to, seeing friends and going to friends' parties, and they would always be showing a horror film as a kind of naughty screening. So what about you, Andy? Did you have a sort of formative intro to horror that you can remember?
It was kind of, I suppose it was a combination of the first video play we ever got. And having an older brother that would rent all sorts.
Oh, that's great, isn't it?
It's really, really helpful, yeah. So it was kind of, I think we must have got our first video mid-80s. So it was like the glory times of sort of 80s horror. And my late dad would rent things like Friday the 13th and so on and so forth. But I can't quite figure this out. So he wouldn't let me watch the whole film because I was far too young. Yeah. But he would quite happily, and I remember this is probably my first memory of horror. He put Friday the 13th, the first one in, and he fast forwarded through the whole film, but stopped at the murders and let me watch the murders. Completely out of context.
That's bizarre, isn't it?
I don't understand why he did that. Whether he was doing that for my older brother and I just happened to be in the room and he didn't tell me to bugger off. I don't know, but I think that's kind of what, because it scared me. It really scared me, but it kind of got me interested. And then Pete, my older brother, would rent things like Day of the Dead and Nightmare on Elm Street and Reanimator.
So it's like proper slasher stuff. It's not kind of the gentle Hammer kind of
No,
introduction to
no,
horrors. It's like, yeah.
not at all. And then we
Yeah.
just started videoing stuff off the TV. My first Hammer film was Dracula, the first Dracula.
Nice.
But I only got as far as the blood dripping on his name on the coffin, and that was it. I was done, and left the room. But I think it was that. It's weird, isn't it? It's that feeling of being scared and thinking, "Well, this is a bit odd."
Yeah,
It just kept me going back and back and back, and then here we are now.
it's
So
a bit.
were you, Andy, were you Betamax or VHS if you were getting
we were
videos in the mid?
VHS.
You were VHS.
I was Betamax.
VHS.
Yeah.
Were you Betamax, Mark?
I was Betamax, yeah.
We were both Betamax because we used to be able to lend each other stuff, and because Betamax was it was better quality than VHS.
Technically the better format.
It was, but unfortunately, then you couldn't get. I mean, that's still going on today, isn't it? People arguing about which. I've just been reading into James Cameron where he says, "Can you all you nerds just get over the various remasters of my films because that's the way we wanted to do them? So get out your mother's basement." This is 40 years later, you know.
My father, well, my family was known for just investing in always the wrong format. So it was Betamax rather than VHS. It was BSB rather than Sky. It was, you know.
Oh yeah, B Sky B became, didn't it? But yeah, no, I remember my dad got a Betamax because he worked in a TV company, so they gave him that because they used to use them for duplicating and broadcasting in those days. You know, Betamax before digital.
DD. Yes.
So yeah, so you know, what the hell is the movie this time, Marcus?
The hell is the movie is Vampire Circus from 1972.
Oh, that's a shame because I watched Friday the 13th.
Well,
so Andy and I can discuss that. But yeah, Vampire Circus, which I'm going to admit I watched for the first time today, which is what I do sometimes. And one of the reasons Marcus and I wanted to do this list specifically is because I hadn't seen 10 plus of them before, and I was like, I need to watch me some Hammer movies. I need to know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about Hammer.
This is good though because you will be a completely fresh reaction to it. Andy, had you seen this movie before?
Yes, many times to be
Really?
honest.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll be interested to see what you had you seen it before, Marcus? Or...
I'd not. I've watched it twice because it is such a big, packed film that I watched it once and it was like I kind of felt that I'd missed a whole load. So I went back and watched it the other day again.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
Right from the start. I mean, Andy's one of those people. Like I have a friend, Stephen Mosley, as well, who acts in a web series that we do. He's seen every Hammer film 50 times. And I sort of realized when he was talking about films like Vampire Circus or Taste of Blood of Dracula, I was like, I haven't seen half of these. And I felt ashamed especially as a horror filmmaker. So, and I've become addicted to Hammer and Bray Studios and the whole production era and the way they were made and who made which one and the falling outs and the controversy and the sets and everything. It's just this amazing. And I wish there was a Hammer Studios these days in the UK. I know they're sort of trying to resurrect Amicus, but I wish there was something like that. There's sort of Roger Corman model of filmmaking where they get $1 million or $500,000 to make a movie. They make the movie or 2 movies in a year. It makes its money at the box office. Then they make another one next year, and then the same set. And they, you know, I wish that still happened in this country. It's been a long time since that happened.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, really. I think it gets overlooked sometimes when you're looking at the history of British films. Not so much now, but I think when I was growing up, it was kind of looked down on quite a lot. Whereas now, I think people realise quite how special and what an achievement it was for quite a small company, really, to keep churning out these films that, you know, albeit of varying quality, but consistently making films at a time when other studios were struggling. It's an amazing story.
It is, and there is a consistency to them. I think, like obviously some of them are sillier than others, but in terms of quality and the beautiful way they were shot, and you know the sets and everything, they are quite something to look up to. I think They are quite, and they are their own thing. There isn't another run of Hammer films that are like those films. There's all this kind of stuff around it. So by the time we do Vampire Circus, it's 1972. It's now definitely trying to hold its own with a lot of other horror films and horror studios that have already happened in the 60s. And I wonder if it's because what I liked a lot straight away about Vampire Circus is it just starts with like a third act climax. So suddenly it's like, burn the house, burn it. And you're like, okay, great, we're in. Usually that's how a Hammer film ends, which is the pitchforks and the flaming, and the villagers all wanting to kill someone. But I loved how that's how it started with this one.
I think a lot of the Dracula films now, because we've got into a series of these with Hammer, they don't necessarily start where the last one left off, but there is this continuation of the legend of Dracula, and it seems like for this one we've got the Count being destroyed by the townsfolk, and then kind of what happens after that, where the disease, the plague, runs rampant through the townsfolk and the village. And the thing that I couldn't get over on first watching this is it was about quarter of an hour into the film before you get to the opening credits, and I'd completely forgotten that I hadn't seen the opening credits. And it's like, what, really?
Yes.
We've had kind of all of this ridiculousness going on. We've had villagers burning down the castle, the Count. We've had naked sex scenes. We've had this girl being abducted. There's kind of a hint of pedophilia in there, and it's like you're so kind of taken aback by the whole thing, and then suddenly there's like, oh, it's the credits.
For me, it's quite a controversial start, really. You've almost got a mini movie before the credits, but as you've touched on there, Marcus, that sort of almost aspect of paedophilia. You've got a woman who abducts a child, takes the child to the Count, who then kills her.
Yeah.
They are so aroused by that, they then have sex. And I think the line is one lust feeds another.
Yeah.
And it's a really, for me, even, it's a really strong, controversial opening, really.
There was a pedo tone going on.
Yeah, there's a real thing that runs through the whole film with child victims, which it is it's pretty strong. It did come into trouble with sort of certain of the US censors.
And I suppose at the time it was more to do with children are innocent rather than these days everyone has to make those kind of lewd jokes and comments and stuff. But it's something we know, I suppose, more about. But then it's just like the children are innocent. So the shocking part is partly that the innocent children are being corrupted rather than the adults.
But you also get sort of the incest thing. Is it Helga and
Heinrich?
The twin brother and sister later in the film as well. It's almost like Hammer's sort of going through the list of, okay, what kind of taboos can we kind of check on the list here? And it was Michael Carreras, whose father, I think, Sir James Carreras, owns the studio who is producing this film, and there are letters going between him and his father. His father saying, what about the good old days when we didn't have to have all this sex? It was just the vampire. It was all subtext. The whole thing that the vampires bite, it was a stand-in for sex, and we didn't have to film all of this grotesque nudity and horrific stuff. And Michael, his son, telling him, we need to appease the distributor. We need rank on side, and they're kind of asking us for forever more kind of shocking things to add to their itinerary.
Isn't it funny when that happens? Because it's like you almost feel like the censors are going to come in and go, no, 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 no. But in this case, they were going, no, more, more breasts, more nudity, more blood.
Yeah, because his father's like telling him, well, if you film this as it is in the script, then you're going to have like 45 minutes because the censor's going to pull it apart in the States. And then Michael's sort of saying, well, actually the bits of the scenes that are kind of really will be censored, that they're only small shots, they're not full scenes or anything, so it's going to trim it slightly. But
they're very quickly edited, those bits, weren't they? Like even the blood later on, you get a little splash of blood and a breast and then a gory face. It's all very quick. Right? When they're hanging off the tree with the faces, but and lying around all gored. It was a bit more like Fulci or something like that, in that this is not like Hammer gore, this is like gore, But Heinrich and Helga, did you recognize those two actors?
Well, there's Romana from Doctor Who, isn't she? That's
yes, Lalla Ward.
Lalla Ward.
And and Robin Sachs played Heinrich, and you might not know who Robin Sachs is, but he's got a horror pedigree because he went on to play Ethan Rayne in Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
Okay.
who was a trickster, old friend of Giles, who went to college with Giles and ends up like running amok in Sunnydale and cursing people and that kind of thing. So, but he look very different in it. I had to go Robin Sachs, and in fact, this film was. I did occasionally find myself missing a Christopher Lee or a Peter Cushing, but then because you always want them to show up. But what it made up for was the spotting people like that in it, because there's loads of people to spot in this movie. I won't mention them all. We could all mention a few of them.
It's a
But
huge cast for Hammer because usually it's quite a chamber piece with Hammer. It's like a
yes,
handful of actors, but this, it goes over, straddles about sort of 15, 16 years. There's sort of the pre-opening sequence credits that explore this kind of origin story, and then we're 15 years later, and then there's a whole kind of another cast that gets introduced.
That's part of the beauty of the film for me. The fact that it hasn't got the big names in it, hasn't got Christopher Lee in it, hasn't got Peter Cushing in it.
I think I find that about films generally. Sometimes it's hard to suspend disbelief when there's like, I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio on screen. It's just Leonardo DiCaprio, but actually, like unknown actors, it could be anybody, and suddenly you're more immersed in it. Or I am.
I mean, on paper, it doesn't sound particularly original, especially coming from Hammer. You've got the Count who's killing children, and the villagers aren't very happy about it, so they decide to do him in, and then his estranged family aren't very happy about it, so they come and get revenge. And it sounds really quite mundane and not interesting. But I think
on paper,
what they've done is they've made a, albeit not quite traditional Gothic Hammer, but without everything that you would expect in a Gothic Hammer horror.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's no Cushing. Michael Ripper doesn't even show up for 5 minutes as a publican or anything. It's really clever what they've done, I think.
I think so. And I think that it's interesting that each time Hammer makes a vampire movie, there's a new story that they introduce into the old Dracula legend. So this actually takes something of the Blood of Dracula from 2 years previous to this film. It's the children that have to suffer because their fathers were involved in killing the Count. So it's the children who have to suffer for the sins of the fathers, and that happens here as well again.
And what horror franchises since then do we know that happens in? I think Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. Our parents did something we now have to suffer for. It's so very influential. And I did think halfway through Vampire Circus, I started thinking this is noticeably Hammer, but they're doing something really clever and different with it.
And they're actually they're actually creating their own legend of Dracula, because in the early films it had to be Count Dracula, and then they introduce it doesn't have to be Count Dracula, it can be other vampires, and then it's like, oh well, it doesn't have to be it can be the children who kind of suffer for the what happens to the Count previously. So
I sent a picture earlier to you, Marcus, of we were sending pictures back and forth because I thought the chap, is it Robert Higgins, the guy who plays the main vampire in this? Sorry, I'm shit with names. The guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark who falls off the cliff in the Nazi in the van.
Count Mitterhouse, Robert Taman.
Yeah.
Count Mitterhouse, is that his name? Not the first guy. That like the guy.
Oh, Emil.
Is it Emil, the guy with the fluffy hair who's all throughout?
He's a panther at first, and then he's fluffy hair. Yeah,
that's it. Yes, and I thought was very good, but I thought he was quite funny. So I sent a picture of him. Every time he feeds, he does this, which is sort of Rick Mail sort of face. So I sent that picture to you, and you sent back a picture of Papa Lazarou from League of Gentlemen, and we both like, well, actually. It did remind me when they come to town, he's going, "You gypsy woman, gypsy." I thought, yes, here we go. The circus has come to town. It felt like
my wife now.
My wife now. It felt a bit like, obviously, I know they were very influenced by Amicus, but I'm sure they also loved Hammer, the League of Gentlemen guys. And it reminded me a bit of the Child Catcher as well from Chitty Bang Bang, which I know Papa Lazarou is based on.
Well, there's the whole creepy circus thing, isn't there?
Yes.
That you get a great vampire movie and then you throw in a creepy circus, creepy traveling
Yeah.
circus. I mean, it's
Bang for your buck.
yeah. I mean, it reminded me a bit of the Seventh Seal, where you've got those
Yes.
kind of traveling performers and death kind of stalking them. It reminded me a bit of Mask of the Red Death.
Yes, that's right. Which
And
is
again, you've got
possibly one we can cover in future, isn't
yeah, because you've got
it?
this plague ripping through the country. In this case, I think
Mm,
it's Serbia that film is set, and you've got the town is quarantined. People can't get in, can't get out. So there's this struggle to kind of get messages in and out of
mm,
the village, and it just lends this really oppressive feeling that they're all stuck there, and now this kind of crazy circus of night has turned up, and they're sort of
mm.
traveling from town to town and kind of spreading this disease, the plague.
I do like the freak show element of it as well, like the Tiger Woman and that. What did you think of that? And the performance aspect of it kind of draws you in quite a lot, doesn't
I think if you can throw a creepy circus into any horror film, you should do it because it's always a
it?
bonus and it always works really effectively.
That's true.
It always reminds me of Todd Browning's Freaks, the
Yes.
Circus of Nights in this. It reminds me of that very much.
One of
I
us,
think,
one of us.
yeah, it's a really striking image. And I think Skip Martin, who plays the clown Martin,
Yes.
is just
That's
fantastic
great.
in
When he
this.
peels off his face and
Just,
his face is underneath.
yeah,
That's very good. Yeah, very
really
good presence
manic.
he is. He's like the sort of ringleader, isn't he? He like comes along as the clown into town, like the little
Yeah,
clown. And everyone goes, "Oh look!" And then, but actually, he's so sinister.
he is
And
really creepy.
There's
yeah,
that great thing that the circus can do, and I don't think maybe they played up this aspect of the film enough. That there's this moral decay and degeneration that's happening that this kind of circus brings into town. There's Emil who seduces the Burgermeister's daughter,
Yeah,
and
that
yeah,
Rosa.
it's that whole kind of moral decay kind of part of the Dracula story that they drive forward with the circus as well.
Do you think that plays on people's fears of being corrupted when actually the corruption is within their own communities? You know,
Mm.
like everyone would sort of look at these people and go, "Oh, they're disgusting freaks," but actually, they just serve to highlight how, you know, I mean, in this case, the bad guys are the bad guys, but I wouldn't call the Burgermeister and all of the old men. I wouldn't call them the heroes, really. I know that they're
It's not quite the last one that we saw, The Blood of
no,
Dracula, where they
no,
really are a corrupt
no, it's
higher
not.
echelons, these guys in society. It's not really that.
No, they're just twits, aren't they,
The
really?
guys are seeing their children being murdered, their
Yeah.
women folk being abducted
Mm.
and seduced, and yeah, they're kind of wanting to put a stop to all that.
Yeah, one of them gets off with the guy, doesn't it? She just as they're leaving, and the husband goes, "Why must you humiliate me like this?" It's like, yeah, that was a bit much, really. But if I took my wife to a show and the guy was getting off with her afterwards, I was like, we're going home, darling.
questions would be asked, really. Yeah,
Questions would be asked, yeah. But yeah, I thought it kept me going until about an hour in, and I was like, is this going to end the way it began, which is pitchforks and flaming torches, which is sort of how it ended. Spoilers if you haven't seen it, but then if you haven't seen it, why are you listening to this? Do you know what I mean? Did you come to the point in the middle where you sort of said, well, how is this going to resolve itself? And I thought it was going to be a
I thought there was I thought it was kind of more interesting than the standard Dracula or vampire movie in that this circus comprises both vampires and non-vampires. So some of
mm,
the circus folk you're shooting and they're coming straight back to life. Others are just dying because
yeah,
they were never. And I think Anna, the schoolmaster's wife who gets seduced at the start by the Count, I
yes,
don't think ever becomes a vampire till much later in the film. So
mm.
yeah, she is. I was a bit confused by whether she was the sort of gypsy circus lady played by I forget her
Yeah,
name.
yeah, yeah. I did as well. I was like, hang on a minute, is she? Because she seems to be this other persona, and then when she gets bitten, she changes into
Yeah,
the other one.
because it's not like they look particularly like each other,
No.
but at the end there's this thing that the schoolmaster recognizes his wife in this Lady from the Circus. So
Yeah.
I've always assumed it is
it's the
his
same
wife,
person.
albeit looking somewhat different.
Yes.
No real explanation, really, but I've always taken it as being that is his wife. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did like the piles of corpses piling up at the end. It was like, bloody hell, they're just like draining some of these people and just leaving them on the sidewalk. Didn't have a sidewalk.
Yeah, and that sort of speaks more to the sort of the slasher movies, that there are
Yes.
kind of, well, I mean, even the slasher movies have more of a kind of a moral narrative arc, that it tends to be people who have transgressed in some way that get burnt alive or bitten or eaten or whatever.
Yeah. We'll have
Whereas
to.
here it's a little bit random.
Yeah.
It's quite, for me, going back to what you were saying a moment ago, Miles, about you got about an hour in and you're wondering, is it going to end the same way it started with
Yeah.
pitchforks and marching on the castle? And it kind of does,
Yeah.
but bloody hell, it's quite nihilistic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, they go in there en masse and not many of them come out.
That's
So
true.
fair play to the Count. You know, he gives it a good go.
Well, at the
I
beginning,
think,
they're terrified of him, aren't they? Because they're like, we can't stand up
yeah,
against
yeah.
him because he'll absolutely destroy us if we go against him. At the end, they just think, fuck it, let's just go for it, and most of them die. So they
Yeah.
were right to
I mean,
worry.
most of them are. I think it's just Dora and Anton who walk away at the end. So sort of young love
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
does
Yeah.
survive. But then at the end, you see the bat kind of flying out of the tomb.
Yes.
So it's like, oh well, the Count's escaped again.
He's lived to
It's
play
certainly
it.
not a happy ending. He doesn't really
No.
wrap it up at
It
all.
doesn't. It doesn't. No, I thought at first it was going to be Heimlich and Helga flying off as bats. That would be nice. And you were like, oh, they got away, because then they could have had their own spin-off, because they were great.
Because at the end of my notes, when I was watching the film, I've written, and everybody lived happily ever after.
Not in a Hammer movie. I mean,
Which they didn't.
usually some handsome guy will come in or usually a handsome / drippy guy will come in and save the woman, and then they started to do it more that no, that doesn't happen. And now by this point it's like, yeah, all bets are off, really. I mean, no, we may not all survive. One really key scene I thought was great was when the Burgermeister goes into the Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought that was so good, because he's laughing and laughing, and you're thinking, I know how this is going to end. It's going to end with him going, and seeing that horrible image of his own death. And I thought he'd had a heart attack. Then obviously later on, he succumbs to, does he die of shock? I can't remember now.
I think he does have a heart. Yeah,
Yeah, he eventually does. He does
Yeah.
have a heart attack, doesn't he? But I thought he was going to die in that scene.
This is always a weird
that was
thing
good.
when watching movies with circuses in them, because I find circuses just kind of pretty disturbing and sinister and the least funny thing in the world. But they're obviously the villagers are all kind of roaring uproariously with the laughter at the strong man and the dwarf, and yeah.
And who was the strong man?
Oh yes, it was
David Prowse.
It was
Yeah,
David
David
Prowse,
Prowse.
Darth Vader himself.
That's right.
The actors were the memorable thing about a lot of it. I thought it was a good cast. Don't you think? I think you had Lynn Frederick, who obviously very interesting, very beautiful young lady before all her troubles. And she actually worked with my dad, did Lynn Frederick, in a sort of roundabout way the year before, because he used to edit a TV show called Follyfoot.
Follyfoot.
Yes, which
I think I've vaguely heard of that.
yeah, it's about a horse farm kind of thing,
Okay.
and she was in it, and he used to say, "Oh, it's old Lynn Frederick," and I'd be like, "She wasn't that old, was she?" She's 39 when she died.
And then there was the cast, and obviously then they had this real life circus people. So
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there's this it's kind of a slightly Austin Powersy scene where the dwarf from the circus is fighting Anton, isn't it? And it's like, yeah, it's a bit of a mini me fighting Austin
It
Powers.
is a little bit funny, isn't it? But I thought it was, it's a shame that they have to shoot all the animals at the end in that very unconvincing lie down and freeze frame way. But the animals are used very well in the film, I think.
Real bats, I think.
Real bats, real tiger, real panther, and I read that they spent apparently Robert Young, and we should talk more about Robert Young too, the director, because he's an
First
interesting guy.
time director.
This is his first movie. Apparently he shot 500 feet of film trying to get the tiger to bite Lalla Ward's arm, or a fake arm full of pork, and he wouldn't do it. So eventually they replaced it with beef. Just goes to show you, tigers like beef, not pork. Just so you know.
Lana
But yeah,
Wood, I saw a YouTube video of her talking about the actual circus animals that had been brought for the shooting, and
oh
that
yeah,
they brought cages with deliberately large gaps left between the bars so that they could shoot between the bars and kind of get the reaction shots.
yes.
And the cast being told how to work with animals or how not to work with animals, because
Mm.
apparently on the previous shoot, one of the cast had placed a bet with another actor that he couldn't tweak the tiger's
Oh, for God's sake.
whiskers, and this guy had taken the bet and tried to tweak it, and the tiger had taken his arm off. So
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet he lost an arm.
yeah,
You
so
don't
they should
tweak a
have shot
tiger's whiskers.
that.
Yeah, they should have known, shouldn't they? Yeah. I don't know much about the shooting of this film because there isn't that much online. Andy, you might know a bit more than we do.
It was Pinewood, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was shot at Pinewood.
Mm,
Shot over August to sort of late September the year before.
mm,
I don't know too much about it, to be honest.
uh,
I know he kind of ran out of time, so there was a number of scenes that weren't shot.
yeah.
Um,
Did they sort of take it off Robert Young, didn't they, and finish it? That some other guy finished it and said, "You've gone
yeah,
over the." It was supposed to be shot in 6 weeks, and they went over into the seventh, and so they took it off him and said, "Well, this is the movie," which would
yeah.
be lovely, lovely for a director.
It'd be interesting to know what else he would have shot, because it felt like a fairly complete film. I know there's
It
some
did.
kind of slightly surreal sequences and some acrobatics in between stuff, but
Maybe he
yeah,
just would have shot more experimental stuff and done more takes and done
yeah.
longer. But with a Hammer movie, you can't do tons of takes. It's one of those things that's like TV almost, isn't it? It's like quick, quick, move, 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 next, next, next. Uh,
I think they took a risk with him as a first-time director, but I think
mm,
it paid off massive. Apart from obviously running out of time and kind of
yeah,
not being able to shoot some scenes, I think it's a remarkable first feature
it
for
is. I'd be
somebody
super proud of that one.
Yeah.
in the Hammer fold.
Yeah,
It's because it is surreal. It
it's
is.
surreal.
It's a bit bonkers for a
Well,
Hammer.
and they were trying to take a few risks by that point anyway. So to get a new director in is a risk. But I mean, he went on, Robert Young, to have a pretty good career. He did,
You
you know,
did.
a lot of TV. And
Mm.
he also did The Worst Witch with Tim Curry, and Fierce Creatures with John Cleese. So he's done a good mix of TV and film.
He
So he
worked. He
had,
worked for Hammer again as well because he directed an episode of the Hammer House of Horror TV series as well. Did I think it was
yeah,
Charlie Boy he did. So yeah, he did
nice.
have him back. So, but yeah, I think it's surreal. I think he had a real
Mm,
good feeling for the material. I think
yeah.
Hammer had to take risks at this point.
Mm,
You'd had Night of the Living Dead had come out a couple of years before, a few years
yeah.
before. You'd had A Clockwork Orange in '71.
Yes, which had,
Cinema was changing.
yeah.
They'd had the peak of the box office for the Gothic horrors for a long time, but yeah, the market was changing and tastes were changing. So I think they did the right thing here and took risks.
I think they did. That's one of the actors from, is the Gypsy Woman, Adrian Corrie,
Mm.
was in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Mm.
There's a crossover there, and so is Dave Prowse.
David
Actually, now I think
Prowse,
about
yeah,
it,
yeah.
yeah, of
Oh yeah.
course he was. Yeah, he was always playing bodyguards and heavies, wasn't he? Because he's a very imposing looking chap.
Mm.
John Mulder Brown, he was played a sort of young twit in this, didn't he? That scene we haven't discussed that, where he rides up on the horse into the field and
Yeah.
they start shooting at him. It was almost like Blazing Saddles or something. He was like jump, 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 and he was like okay, okay, and the horse runs off and they're still shooting at him and he waves his white hanky and he goes, all right, I'm going back, and puts his hat on and walks back. I thought that was actually really funny.
Well, I was going
Yeah.
to say, because there is a lack of humor in this film that
Yeah,
in other Hammer films they felt they've had to get some kind of funny character in there, or a bit of light relief. There's very little, and that's probably the only bit I can think of that isn't kind of quite grim
I
and
think that's the only it's the only comedy bit I could think of that's
yeah,
outright kind of like he looked like a right twit walking back. He's like, all right, like he's having a huff with the people shooting at him. Like, okay, I'm going back, and the horse just rides off onto the horizon. There were some nice
yeah.
bits in it where all the elders of the village were all talking near the beginning, and then near the end, it reminded me they did that very nicely in Sleepy Hollow, which I think is very influenced by Hammer, right down to the pink blood, a very unrealistic pink blood. But Sleepy Hollow, the 1999 Tim Burton one, I think is a great film. And there's some great scenes where you got all the elders of the village. I think Ian McDiarmid, Jeffrey Jones, Michael Gambon, and all talking together, and they're all trying to solve the problem, but they're all just like fearful. And so it reminded me of, obviously Tim Burton did a good job of recreating that Hammer vibe that they have in films like Vampire Circus, where you have these old sort of stalwart actors trying to go blah 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 blah, blah, let's solve the problem. It's like, no, you're all going to die. He said at the beginning, you're all going to die. And indeed they did die.
Yes, and I mean it's amazing that this film clocks in, I think, under 90 minutes, because it feels like there's a lot more to it than a sort of 87-minute film or whatever it is.
It's fast moving. Yeah,
didn't really give you time to think really, or
no.
pause for thought. I would have loved to have seen it a little bit longer, and kind of, you know, if any of those unseen films were more about the Circus of Nights and that side of things, I would have loved to have seen it, because I think it's fantastic. That, going back to the Hall of Mirrors, I think that's just the scene where the twin vampires take the two children through the mirror is fantastically realised. Really, I think really quite disturbing.
Is that what David Lynch calls the eye of the duck scene? Right? You know, it's like the scene that, you know, you see it, you look at a duck and it's got its beak and its wings and stuff, but it's got its eye, and its eye's right there. That's I think the Hall of Mirrors scene is the eye of the duck scene. I was like, it's like it comes at just that Act 2 break point where you're like, I need this now to escalate into something. So I thought that was genius. That send the old guy into there to scare the shit out of him, and see himself being abducted, and it visually again, brilliant cinema, because it visually shows what's going on.
I mean, the visual language of the film harks back to an earlier era. I mean, almost like to the John Cocteau Orpheus kind of legends with the mirror scenes in that film, sort of almost like in the Orpheus in the underworld as well.
That's a nice comparison. Yes, you're right. Yes, I didn't even think that far back. The Lumiere brothers have been inspiring people for decades, and
it's a film that feels quite sort of knowing for a first-time director to almost call upon all of these different influences as well.
Yeah, I wonder what Robert Young's background was, actually. I haven't done a lot of research on him before he did this. This was his first movie, wasn't it? So, but yeah, he obviously brought something to bear on it, because he put his own stamp on it till they kicked him off, obviously. But
I'm just looking actually at Robert Young as director, his credits, and he went on to direct episodes of Minder and Bergerac in the 1980s. So.
And Lovejoy.
I think, okay.
Yeah, I think he brought some of the cast with him. He seems to work with some of the same actors, some of the actors that are in this. But yeah, based on this film, you'd go, oh, Robert Young, he's one to watch. You know,
he wasn't.
Coming along very late in the day. I would describe his career as being very solid. You know, he did some very popular TV. He did Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. He did a few episodes of that. And he did Fierce Creatures, which, you know, well, not the best film ever. It has a good it did well. It's no Fish Called Wanda, but it did well.
It seems a shame, you know. Was he not given another Hammer directing role because he went over budget with this one? I don't know.
It looks like they didn't give him another movie. Yeah. But I think
Hammer were running out of time anyway, weren't they?
Yeah, they only had a couple of years, and were the Barreras guys, were they really sort of bearing down hard too?
Yeah, very much. I think they completely changed tack by this point, and they were trying to be added gore, added nudity and sex, just to try and compete with the change in cinema, really. So in America.
And it seems that the distributors were more kind of calling the shots now, rather than it being kind of driven by Hammer.
Which is a shame.
Hammer weren't as powerful as they were in the late 50s and 60s and the heyday. You know, its box office was waning a bit. So yeah, I think anything they could do. I think the one other person I would mention in relation to this film is George Baxt, who wrote the treatment for it. Didn't write the full screenplay, but he wrote the treatment for it.
Yes.
Who wrote two brilliant British horror films in the early 60s. He wrote City of the Dead, which is one of my absolute favourites, and is the first unofficial Amicus film.
Yes.
And then he wrote Night of the Eagle as well, which is a wonderful supernatural witchcraft film.
Ooh, I haven't seen Night of the Eagle. I have to watch that.
It's fantastic.
City of the Dead I've seen.
Well, it will be interesting next time because we're welcoming back Christopher Lee for one last hurrah as Dracula
Nice.
in the Satanic Rites of Dracula. So it'll
Ooh.
be interesting seeing the old master at work again.
I'll be interested to see what you hear. Or
Mm.
hear. See what you hear? Hear what
You
think
could you
about it.
could you could see what I think if you like, or hear
Yeah.
what I see, and I'll
Either
see
or,
what.
yeah.
Anything with Christopher Lee, I could sit mesmerized as if he was actually Count Dracula. Him and Peter Cushing are just the best, I think. Well, yeah. Look, Andy, thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thank you, Andy. It's been good to have you on the podcast.
No,
Nice to
thank
have
you.
you
Thanks for having me on. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it as well. It's been great. Thank you.
It's been really great to share your expertise and especially with a film that we didn't know tons about. You've definitely filled in some shady areas there. So, Marcus, next episode, which won't be in 3 months, I promise. We'll get round to it a lot sooner. What have we got next month? It's our penultimate in the list.
Satanic Rites of Dracula, 1973, next time. And then we have the final Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell from 1974.
Great. So we're ending with a Lee and a Cushing. Good. Always end with a Lee and a Cushing. And thank you so much to everybody. Thanks to Andy for coming on, and thanks for listening. And thanks to some of our mates, like our good friend Katie Wilkes, who
she's an avid listener. That's great.
Yeah, it's always nice. I always assume no one I know is ever going to hear this, and just random people are going to pick up on it. So occasionally you bump into an old friend, or we were celebrating my 50th birthday in Cardiff last month and our friend Katie Wilkes was there, and she said, "Oh, I love your podcast." So we love you, Katie. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone else for the lovely comments. Keep them coming, and we will see you next month perhaps, but very soon for another episode of Hammerheads. Thank you very much.
See you next time.
Bye.